come to the wrong person. I have already left you, Lord.
I was born as the eldest son of the Park of Milyang family, Gyeonggong branch, Songdang lineage. You don't really understand what I am saying, do you? Okay, in other words, I was born as the eldest son in a family that values tradition, especially honoring deceased ancestors through ancestral rites more than life itself. And it was my duty to inherit the responsibility of upholding all those traditions. Our house was a thoroughly Confucian family, with Buddhism appropriately mixed in, conducting ancestral rites 13 times a year, having absolutely no relation to the gospel. I had many uncles, aunts, many cousins, nephews, nieces, but no one of them was a Christian, and it was a family that lived knowing that serving ancestors was the greatest pride. Born as the eldest son in such a house, I grew up learning that serving ancestors well and being loyal and filial to parents and country is humanity's greatest reward and mission. Not only did I know nothing about Jesus, but I even felt hostility toward Christians. At that time, ancestral rites were more precious to me than life itself, so those who claimed ancestral rites are idolatry could only be seen as enemies. No matter how sick I was or how busy with work, I never missed participating in ancestral rites. Even after my military discharge, when I began my civil service life in Daegu, this way of living did not change. Harboring the constant hope of reviving our family that had lost its former glory and was declining, I eventually reached marriageable age. Following the strict orders of my grandfather and father, I couldn't even dream of a love marriage, so naturally I began meeting prospective brides through arranged meetings. My father always said,
"You are not a second or youngest son, you know what I mean? If you think you can just marry anyone you fancy, I'll break your legs. You must find a good daughter-in-law candidate and revive the family, okay? You must choose carefully from noble family daughters."
It was a stern command. However, even without such strict orders, I would have voluntarily done so anyway. The belief that the family's prosperity comes before my personal happiness was my thorough philosophy of life. The woman I met at my first arranged meeting, I remember, was a young lady with the surname Yoon. After brief greetings, I made my introduction politely. I am the eldest grandson of the main house of Park of Milyang family, Gyeonggong branch. Our house has 13 ancestral rites a year, and if you marry in, you shouldn't think of setting up a separate household. And I have quite a few younger siblings. I paused briefly and counted on my fingers one by one. I had 5 siblings in total. The look on that young lady's face at these shocking conditions. While listening to my story, she made an ugh expression and put down her coffee cup, and her hands trembled so much that the cup made clicking sounds against the saucer. Led by her, who ran away without looking back, over 30 prospective brides all fainted at these terrible conditions and fled. Who would want to spend most of their life serving husbands' deceased forefathers? Despite this situation, there were 2 who said they liked the arrangement. However, I'm not the kind of person who thinks, as long as the person is a woman, I can marry her no matter what, am I? I thought it would be better to live alone for life, so I had no choice but to politely reject them. Having always been rejected, the fact that I had at least rejected someone once became a comfort in my misfortune. The arranged meetings that began when I was 27 continued until I turned 29, but there was no one willing to marry into the family. Finally, the very act of meeting prospects became like a ceremonial event. However, even though everything had become listless, my will regarding finding a suitable wife for me and my family remained unchanged, and I reached the point of being prepared that I might not be able to marry. On a day in February 1979, through the introduction of a relative grandmother, I set out on yet another ordinary arranged meeting, but the moment I met her at the coffee shop, my eyes seemed to pop out. Compared to the women I had met for arrangements so far, she was an extremely ordinary woman of average level, but she had a charm that captivated my heart more than anyone else. Like the old saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, a match made in heaven. The fighting spirit boiled up in me. I must not let this woman slip away. Whatever means I have to use, I will definitely make her my wife. However, I couldn't change the repertoire I had maintained so far. If I deceived her about our family circumstances to get married, and she later learned the truth and said we couldn't live together, our family lineage would be finished, so even if I wanted to deceive her, I wasn't in a position to do so. But if I told the truth as it was, I would obviously be rejected, so just for that day, I decided to approach very carefully. My family? I am the eldest grandson of the main house of Milyang Park family, Gyujong Gongpa. For the first time during arranged meetings, I omitted the great from great main house. That way, it would be at least a little less shocking. Our house has ancestral rites. No matter how I thought about it, 13 times was too many. Whatever happens, let me reduce it first. 6 times, a year. Even though I reduced the number, the woman was startled. Now I had to make a desperate charge. I have quite a few siblings, but they're all good-hearted so they won't cause any heartache. Her face, while listening to my introduction, clearly showed the desire to get up from this place quickly, but I couldn't retreat. I coaxed her with sweet words to go around several more coffee shops, suggesting we have just one more cup of coffee at the last place, trying to buy time. Miss Choi, shall I read your fortune once? I asked casually, expecting her to refuse, but unexpectedly she said,
Yes, please do.
When I later asked my wife why she readily agreed to have her fortune read then, she answered like this.
If I had even 1% desire to marry you, would I have asked you to read it? Since I wasn't going to see you again anyway, I thought I might as well get a free fortune reading even if it was a waste of time.
However, not knowing such inner thoughts, I was just happy to have earned more time to spend together. Having studied books on I Ching, fortune-telling, and physiognomy that my ancestors had read for several years, my amateur skills had reached a level beyond beginner, so I placed white paper in front and stylishly scribbled Chinese characters with a marker pen. My wife said that as she looked at what I had written for a while, then looked at my face, then looked at the paper again, and looked at me again, she was unconsciously moved.
Seeing a young person write difficult Chinese characters so elegantly like an old man, he seemed quite decent.
Secretly attracted to me, she couldn't coldly reject me and began meeting me 2-3 times. And perhaps her eyes were blinded. Surely God made it so. She promised marriage after 3 months. Later, I learned that my wife's upbringing was as harsh as our house. Born and raised in a village right below an old temple called Seoknamsa, my wife had never encountered any spiritual world other than Buddhism from early on. She even spent her school years wearing clothes made from fabric used for monks' robes. In 5th grade, after hearing her homeroom teacher explain how good a job at a bank was, captivated by the cool image of a bank employee, my wife eventually became a bank employee as she had wished. At first, the joy of achieving her dream was great, but like all jobs, before long she began to feel indifferent to the daily routine like a squirrel running on a wheel. Gradually, becoming skeptical about the meaning of life and worrying, my wife reached the absurd conclusion that if life is to die and return to nothingness anyway, instead of going when I'm old and bent and unsightly, it would be better to leave at the most beautiful age while preserving my beauty. While living busy and difficult days, what gave her some comfort was the thought that I can die beautifully of my own will anytime. At the workplace where my wife worked, there was a colleague named Myung-hui. She was a young lady who, no matter what made her so happy, always yielded in everything and took losses, yet never stopped having laughter and hymns on her lips. My wife gradually became curious about this Jesus-believing colleague. What makes her so happy? What's the secret to being able to live with laughter always? One day, just before leaving work, Myung-hui, who had been waiting for an opportunity, finally caught my wife.
Hey, dear friend, please spare some time this evening. I really have something to tell you.
I don't have time.
However, after work, Myung-hui dragged the reluctant wife to where the Dongsan hospital nurses were studying the Bible and succeeded in evangelizing her by reading John 1:12. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God.
Sister, just receive him. Then you'll become a child of God.
Milyang Hui's earnestness toward one soul finally shook my wife's heart. Amazingly, that night my wife met the Holy Spirit. Through one short verse, eternal hope was born in her empty spirit that had been living, preparing for death. After that, whether eating or drinking or whatever she did, my wife lived centered only on Jesus, becoming such a thorough Jesus person that her workplace colleagues and supervisors teased her as crazy. Even at arranged meetings, she would fire off rapid questions as soon as she sat down.
Do you believe in Jesus?
If the answer was even slightly unsatisfactory, no matter how good a bridegroom candidate he was by worldly standards, she would turn around and leave without another look. If she happened to meet someone who believed in Jesus, she would ask the second question,
Are you confident you can keep Sunday worship for life?
Most young men flinched at this point. The third sharp question was,
Are you confident you can give tithes thoroughly?
By this point, the bachelors would make various excuses and quietly leave.
Faith is all well and good, but what is this? A pastor candidate examination? If I marry this woman, I'll have a hard time getting a warm bowl of rice for the rest of my life. She'll be running around doing dawn prayers and all-night prayers all the time, won't she? It's as clear as fire. Let's run quickly.
Among them were pastors and eldest sons, youth group presidents, and many who claimed to have deep roots of faith as born believers, but they all seemed overwhelmed by my wife's aggressive approach and ran away. Looking back later, it was interesting to see how God worked. Through the meeting of a young man who couldn't marry because of his consistent repertoire of I am the eldest grandson of the great main house. Our house has 13 ancestral rites a year. And a young lady who couldn't marry because of her repertoire of Do you believe in Jesus? Can you keep Sunday worship and tithing for life? God eventually formed a family of faith. After about 2 years passed like this, my wife became 27 years old. Not only colleagues of the same age at her workplace, but even younger colleagues had married and came carrying chubby sons with their husbands saying,
Look, isn't he cute? Peekaboo.
Even though she smiled outwardly at this sight, inwardly she was burning with anger.
This is strange. I serve the Lord more diligently than anyone and struggle to live by faith, yet I can't even get married while unbelievers marry easily. Is there really a need to insist on living with such faith?
My wife began to feel that her overly zealous faith was actually an obstacle to marriage, and she began to fall into temptation by quietly pushing Jesus, whom she had prioritized, to the background of her life.
There are many excellent and successful people among those who don't live a life of faith, but since they don't believe in Jesus, they'll naturally go to hell. Then what's stopping me from going to the hell where all those people are going?
Finally, my wife decided to abandon her faith.
If I find a decent person, I'll marry even someone who doesn't believe in Jesus. Now it's farewell to God.
Having made up her mind like this, my wife met me for an arranged marriage, and we eventually became husband and wife. After marriage, my wife unhesitatingly bowed in our family shrine according to our family customs and became accustomed to all those ancestral rites. Our newlywed life was happy and our eldest daughter was born. It was around the time our cute daughter was babbling quite well. One early morning, my wife woke up to the sound of dawn bells from a nearby church. It was a bell sound she had heard every day without fail since marrying into the family, but usually she had listened to it without any emotion. But that dawn's bell sound was different from usual as soon as the bell sound entered her ears. Suddenly, a touching emotion surged up from her heart. My wife, who immediately realized that the warmth touching her heart was the Holy Spirit's touch, shook her head and said firmly,
Lord, no. I am not the one. You've come to the wrong person. I have already left the Lord, and I am someone who has decided to go to hell and performs ancestral rites and serves spirits.
However, that emotion, far from disappearing, continued to pierce her soul with even greater resonance, along with the continuing bell sounds. Dong. Dong. My wife, in her distress, covered her ears with both hands and gritted her teeth. Right at that moment, there was a voice heard from deep in her heart.
My beloved daughter, you say you have left me, but I have never once left you. Even when you serve spirits and bow before idols, I rather sigh and wait for you to return. I still love you now. My daughter, come back.
That was the core of the gospel. What must have been the joy and emotion of my wife, who finally realized the firm truth that children saved once by Jesus' blood on the cross are never abandoned, but are always with us until the end of the world. She silently cried and cried until her pillowcase was soaked, meeting the Lord again whom she had forgotten for so many years. After recovering her lost faith like this, my wife began to change. Her face regained vitality, and her life overflowed with energy to the point that even people around her felt inexplicably happy. Even her parents-in-law were excited to boast about their daughter-in-law.
My son, no matter how I look at it, we really got a good daughter-in-law.
Really? What happened?
Do you know how many complaints our friends have about their daughters-in-law? Even if they act like the tongue and lips at first during the honeymoon, after having 1 or 2 children, they start talking back and gradually making impudent remarks.
But Father, you think my wife is okay?
Yes, she's fine. She's getting better and better. These days, she says there's nothing trustworthy in the refrigerator and goes to the market so diligently. Every day she buys fresh things and puts them on her parents-in-law's table, not sparing her body to shop and carry things back. It's so lovely.
Going to the market on Sunday afternoons. Going in the evening saying there's something she missed. Going again on Wednesday evening saying there's more to buy. Going on Friday night saying there are cheap things at the night market. It was natural for my shoulders to straighten with pride. But before long, a shocking fact was revealed. The greatest joy of my wife, who had newly met God, was worshipping. However, since words like church or worship couldn't even be mentioned in our house, my wife was using deception as a last resort. Whenever there was worship, she would make an excuse about going to the market, leave the house, quickly take care of business, then sit in the back row of the church and secretly meet the Lord while crying. My wife later said this.
Do you know how happy and excited I was then? You don't know how much God's help meant in overcoming that difficult life. The words of Isaiah 46:3-4, promising that once chosen, He would not abandon me to the end, held me up daily. I cried so much then.
Such a life that even her husband didn't notice continued for about half a year. My wife's face became brighter day by day, and my parents, not knowing the inside story, praised their daughter-in-law until their mouths were dry. But everything with a long tail gets caught. One day when I came home from work, there was chaos. My father and mother were furiously shouting in the middle of the main hall, and my wife was kneeling like a serious criminal, crying loudly. My father, whose eyes met mine as I stood there blankly not understanding, scolded me like thunder.
Hey, you fool! Did you know your wife was a Jesus person when you married her? Or didn't you know?
It really felt like being hit on the back of the head with a pestle out of nowhere. Without time to consider anything, I waved both hands and shouted, Father, I don't know what you're talking about. I absolutely didn't know. My father, gaining more strength from my firm attitude, pointed at my wife and shouted loud enough to lift the roof.
Listen well. You, from today, either abandon Yasso
Father always called Jesus Yasso.
and follow our family customs, or get divorced. Choose one.
Mother also chimed in, taking Father's side.
My goodness, our family's daughter-in-law is a Jesus person. What a terrible thing.
Fathers continued shouting toward the daughter-in-law.
Speak quickly. Will you divorce or abandon Yasso?
My wife, who until then had been sitting quietly and only crying, suddenly raised her head. My wife, who was naturally gentle and obedient in everything, looked up at her parents-in-law fearlessly with her tear-stained face, and said,
Father, Now, even if a knife comes to my throat, I cannot deny Jesus, and I cannot divorce either.
Instantly, my parents received a heart-crushing shock.
How dare you?
Father, trembling with anger, launched another attack.
No, absolutely not. Our family's daughter-in-law being a Yaso person is nonsense. Choose one of the two.
Father, I cannot divorce. I cannot betray Jesus either.
I stood in the middle of this terrifying fight. My wife was a Christian, the daughter-in-law who had been so praised in all aspects, including ancestral rites, was a Jesus believer. In a situation where I couldn't take anyone's side, the tense fight continued for over 30 minutes. For my parents' side, it was an issue they couldn't yield on, even if their lives depended on it. And for my wife's side, it was also a life or death struggle. No matter how much I thought about it, I judged this was a war that couldn't be concluded. The best method was to avoid this situation first. Then a clever plan flashed through my mind. Father, please give me just 3 months. I will definitely convert her within that time. If I can't, I'll divorce her myself, so don't worry.
Good. If that's your intention, let's do that. 3 months.
Father raised 3 fingers and shook them while making the commitment. I was confident in my own way, thinking of my wife with her gentle and good nature. My wife who believed whatever I said, my wife who followed my will without ever rebelling. I was confident that converting her within 3 months would be a piece of cake. Yes, Father, absolutely don't worry. I will definitely change her mind within 3 months.